Hello everyone, it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today for a new video. I'm excited to be sharing today's project because I'm going to be using products from Tim Holtz's brand new Distress color collection, which is Scorched Timber. This is a brand new color to Tim's Distress line, and it is a really great neutral that can be used in a lot of different ways. I wanted to show you how you can take a brown like Scorched Timber and use it with some other colors to create a really unique distressed and worn feel. So I'm going to use a mix of Distress Oxide, Distress Ink, and also Distress Spray Stain to create the beautiful depth and color we have throughout this project. Starting first, we're going to work with Distress Oxide inks. I have Scorched Timber, Speckled Egg, and Stormy Sky. We're going to use these to do some Distress ink smooshing. I'm going to be working on top of Distress watercolor paper, and I'm going to use the smooth side for my application. And then to apply the ink, I'm going to use a stamp pocket, which you usually would use for storing your stamps, but it works great as an applicator for Distress ink smooshing. We're going to need some water, so I'm going to use a Distress sprayer. And the way I like to do this is I want to work on top of this pocket so that way I have more control of the placement of the ink when I do the smooshing. A lot of people like to put their ink on top of a glass mat like what I'm working on here and then just place their paper into the wet ink. But I don't like not knowing where the ink is going to be applied. And so by using a pocket like this, you get a little bit more control with where the ink is being placed. So I started first with Speckled Egg and I smushed that onto my paper. I spritzed it with a little bit of water to get everything moving because I do want more of a wash for this layer. And then I'll dry this with my heat tool before moving on to the next color. That's going to be Stormy Sky. This is a really nice purpley blue color, and I thought this would go well with Speckled Egg and also Scorched Timber to create some unique depths of color. I'm going to apply this color a little bit more sparingly because I don't want too much of this overtaking the Speckled Egg. And I'm going to dry this layer as well. Oxide inks are less transparent than Distress inks, so they do layer a bit differently, which is why I wanted to work with the Oxides first as my base layer of color. We will bring in some Distress inks then as well. So here is some Scorched Timber, and this I'm going to apply mostly around the edges because I want this paper to look worn. And I'm also going to speckle it throughout this middle section of the paper as well. I know we're covering up a lot of our inks that we've already put down, but that's the really cool effect about the layering with the Oxide inks or Distress inks. This ink smooshing allows you to get different shades of other colors in between those areas where the inks are overlapping. So here's where I'm going to bring in some Distress inks. This is Salvage Patina and also Scorched Timber. Both of these are Distress ink, so they have a more transparent look to them. So when you overlap them with another color of ink, that color that you're putting it on top of will still show through. So you're going to get a different look with your inks and how they layer. So you can see we get some really unique layering areas here. We've got some nice watermarks, and I'm accentuating that by splattering the whole entire thing with some water as well. So we've got a lot of layers going on here, which looks amazing. And I did want to intensify some of that darker splattering by bringing in the Scorched Timber Distress Spray Stain, and I'm going to splatter this across the entire piece so I get a lot of those tiny little dots of color. Now that my background is dry, we're going to go ahead and start working on adding some additional texture. This is going to be done with an embossing folder. I'm using Simon Says Stamp's Leaf Tumble embossing folder. It's a 3D folder, and I ran that through my die cut machine. That left me with this pattern that is hard to see, but we're going to make it stand out by rubbing our Distress ink pad over top of the raised areas. So I'm taking that ink pad and I'm burnishing it across the paper, not pressing hard because I only want it to pick up on the areas of the embossing that are actually raised. I do have some spots where I get a little streaking, and I like that. I think that adds to the distressed feel of this paper, and that really makes the embossing stand out nicely. I'm going to add a little bit more splattering with a Distress Mica stain. This is Phantom Mist. It's a similar color to the Stormy Skies, which I thought would tie all of that together really nicely. And because it's a mica stain, it will have a little bit of a shimmer once this is dry. Alright, so I'm going to bring in Simon Says Stamp's Rose Winged Butterfly die, and I'm going to cut this twice from some white paper. I'm going to poke out all the little center areas of the butterfly with my Place and Pierce tool. I'm using that on top of Simon Says Stamp's Positively Perfect craft pad to help me get all those little pieces knocked out. And then one of those pieces I'm actually going to spray with the Phantom Mist mica stain. I want to have a shimmery middle for the butterfly, and I'll cut that middle out and actually glue it on top of my white piece. This will give my butterfly some dimension and some color and tie in all of those other colors that are in the background. I also pulled out some ephemera from Tim Holtz's palette collection. That ephemera pack has a lot of great different colors of ephemera pieces, so I picked out a lot of blue ones that I thought matched nicely with the colors in my project, and I'm distressing each of them with some of that Scorched Timber. Sometimes I went with a blending brush and blended that onto my ephemera pieces, and then other times I went directly from the pad onto the paper, just depending on the look I was going for. And that ink that I used was the Distress ink pad, not the Oxide. So I'm going to start assembling all my pieces here. I'm gluing them down with craft tacky glue, including the butterfly. Here I'm going to trim off any excess that might be hanging off the sides to get everything cleaned up. This card panel is a little bit smaller than an A2 card, so it'll get matted nicely with that card base. Here's where I'm bringing in that butterfly that I colored with the Phantom Mist mica stain. And I'm just trimming the wings off of the body of the butterfly with my Simon Says Stamp fine detail scissors because I just want the body of the butterfly here. I want to glue this onto my white butterfly, and I did distress this as well with some of that Scorched Timber Distress ink pad. That looks really neat on top of the Phantom Mist mica stain, and I thought this would make a beautiful center for the butterfly, add some contrast to the white, and that also ties in all those other colors really well. I did decide to add a couple brads to this project. I'm using Tim Holtz fasteners. I'm piercing a hole into the areas that I want the brads to go with my Place and Pierce tool, and I am doing that on top of the Positively Perfect craft pad. That gives me a nice base to push my pierce tool into, so that way I get a nice clean hole. Then I can just poke the brad through and then fasten it to the back side of the paper. That made a really nice embellishment for this card project and added to the collage feel. I'm bringing in this Etched greetings stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. It does have coordinating dies, which I will use to cut out my sentiment. I wasn't sure at first which greeting I wanted to use. I have the Miss You and also Thank You greeting, so I ended up choosing Miss You for this card. I am going to stamp this onto some pattern paper. I really liked the color of this pattern paper that I had left over from another project, and I thought that the sentiments would look nice embossed with white on top of this. So I'm going to stamp them with embossing ink, and then go ahead and apply some Simon Says Stamp white embossing powder over top, and then I'll use my heat tool to set those greetings, and finally use the coordinating dies to cut them out. To adhere the greeting, I did use some thin 3D foam squares along the bottom of my card, and I did make sure to overlap it with some of the ephemera pieces so that it ties everything together. And you'll notice we have a visual triangle of ephemera collections on this card. Those groupings of 3, and you can visually connect them in a triangular form, really makes the card layout very cohesive and feel balanced. I ended up putting this onto an A2 card, and you can see that beautiful shimmer from the mica stain shining on top of this beautiful background made with the new Scorched Timber Distress color from Tim Holtz. This is a great way to show you how you compare it with other colors that you have in your collection already, and it gives a beautiful worn and aged feel that really embodies the distress style. Well, I hope you were inspired by this project using the new Tim Holtz Distress color. If you're curious about any of the products that I'm using today, including the new Distressed Scorched Timber color, you can find all of those links down below in the video description or over on my blog. Thanks so much for watching this video. I'll be back soon with more to share. But until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.